Good morning, Crossroads of America, and welcome to the first episode of Soaring Through the Roaring 20s podcast. I'm your host, John. Oh, what a journey it's been. However, today our nation is facing a major crisis in our cities and suburbs. In our first episode, we uncovered the truth of prohibition and how American people are affected. Now, who's ready to soar? Fellas, prohibition is the legislation of the banning of alcohol within the United States. Prohibition didn't start in the 1920s. It began back in 1846 when Maine passed the earliest prohibition law. In present time, prohibition is returning to the greatest era in American history. From this, vigorous vexation and rage is coming to the streets of some of our famous cities, and it's only getting worse. Protests are taking place, blocking many major roads, and what is our government doing? Not much. Although our era has a booming economy, income is soaring, and prosperity, it is no good if the American people are angry. It started back in 1917 by two senators who broke the tie, that being Senate Majority Leader Thomas R. Marshall and Hunter Harrison, who supported the idea of prohibition. Back in December of 1917, Congress was voting on the passing of the prohibition. It passed the United States House of Representatives effortlessly, but there was one more step. It had to pass the Senate. However, while voting was taking place, it seemed to be a contrast from the lower chamber. Although the Democrats were the majority, many would switch to Republicans on this major issue that would define America. In the end, Thomas R. Marshall, Senate Majority Leader, and Hunter Harrison from New York State would break the tie, passing the prohibition legislation. Thus, on January 17, 1917, the prohibition legislation would take effect, prohibiting the sales of manufacturing and transportation of alcohol, causing millions to protest, pour down alcohol down the sewers, and cause strife in America. Due to the prohibition, we are seeing the rise of urban immigration, political corruption, and the breakout of gang violence in America. On urban immigration, many middle-class families are angry over the fact that the immigrants are moving to the suburban areas, and overall started their own protests against the immigrants. With the prohibition in effect, gangs on the streets are not being content, which kicked off violence and killings in the streets right now. Due to this, many are being propelled out of their homes, forced into poverty, and are becoming homeless, turning the greatest era in American history into a homeless shelter. Overall, the topics of gang violence and urban immigration are leading to the political corruption in Washington, D.C., causing our leaders to make assumptions about America and lie to the citizens they serve. And so, it is proven that the banning of the consumption of alcohol is causing violence in our inner cities, anger on the outskirts of our cities, corruption of our nation's highest leaders, and the setback to the greatest era in America. Thank you for joining me for the very first episode of Soaring Through the Roaring 20s, where we uncover the history and truth of prohibition, and how is it affecting us today in the 1920s.